Hey YouTube, how's everyone doing today? We'll be getting started shortly. All right, how's everyone's Monday doing? Welcome YouTube. Really appreciate everyone that's here today joining us. Really excited to get into today's topics, but before we do that, wanted to first tell you a little bit more about Bad Takes in Football. This is obviously a new channel. Really, the goal of this channel is to be able to connect with the community, other fellow NFL fans, engage, talk about takes, good or bad, have a good time, get some good knowledge. From a structure perspective, you'll probably see a live stream every Monday where I'll be going and recapping what happened the weekend prior in games, as well as previewing the upcoming games. On Wednesdays, you'll see another live stream. Within then, you'll also see specific topics discussed. I'll create separate videos from these live streams, telling you a little bit more about those topics, so that if you don't have time to join these live streams, you'll be able to actually connect with me or watch my content on those shorter videos. During the preseason, I'll obviously be talking about what's going on in training camp, any sort of free agency, trades, anything along those lines. So I'll be discussing that probably on a weekly basis, and as preseason games kick up, you'll see more live streams potentially on Wednesdays as well. For now, it might just be Mondays, depending on what that schedule looks like. So for today's topics, first things first, really want to get into a couple interesting things for me. And I think actually some of these worlds might collide later on in the world. So what I mean by that, first off, is second round picks in the NFL. Right now, none of them are actually reporting, besides two as of now that we know have been signed. I'll go a little bit further into that. Another topic we'll be discussing today will be the NFLPA, specifically the Executive Director, Lloyd Howell Jr., who seems to have some conflict of interest. The committee themselves, as well as players, have found some concerning information about his ties to a private equity firm that he's a consultant of. Again, I'll get further into that. And then lastly, what I'll discuss today are who I'm interested to see coming into training camp. And for this, I'll mostly focus on rookies as well as second-year players that I think have the most to prove and can provide the most value to their teams coming into the week. So go ahead and going forward with that. First things first, I'll dive into the second-year players the second rounders not reporting to minicamp. So right off the bat, right, to get into this a little bit, there are two players that have been signed in the second round so far this year. That is Jaden Higgins, the wide receiver out of Iowa State, who was signed by the Texans, and then also Carson Schweichinger, who is a linebacker out of UCLA, was signed by the Browns. Carson was the first pick in the second round, and Jaden was actually the second pick in the second round. Now, why this is interesting and what's important about this. First things about that, Jaden Higgins was actually the first to be signed, the wide receiver for the Texans, and he was actually given a fully guaranteed deal, right? This is unique. This has actually never happened in the NFL's history. There's never been a second round pick that got a fully guaranteed deal. And then following that, the second day, Carson Schweichinger that got drafted by the Browns, he got a fully guaranteed deal as well. So this is extremely unprecedented. And what has happened from this is really a push between players, the NFLPA, and ownership. The owners are obviously hesitant to be able to offer fully guaranteed deals to second-year players, right? This was a topic of conversation, when it came to NFL quarterbacks getting signed to their second deals, right? And so that's a completely different world that's completely unexpected from a second round draft pick. You're seeing this from a first round draft pick perspective, but it is very uncommon. And so now we're seeing that happen today. Going into this a little bit further, why I find this interesting, right? So training camp. This has actually already started, right? It's for a couple of teams, most specifically the Chargers. The Chargers actually started their training camp this past weekend, and they actually had the first second rounder to officially not report to camp in Trey Harris. Trey Harris is a wide receiver out of Ole Miss, and they're obviously hoping for a lot out of them. From the Chargers' perspective, going to be a big part of their passing game alongside, people like Justin Herbert's other wide receivers. So going into this a little bit further, I wanted to kind of digest and take a look at how this can impact teams. First things, when you're a rookie, there's a lot of importance and there's a lot of value in being a part of the team, being with the team, being inside that playbook, and just working with veterans and getting yourself onto that field. Um, I've seen this multiple times where players have either had an injury or weren't able to report early for one reason or the other, and generally they don't get off to a fast start. I can think of multiple players, even in the first round, right? I'll give a good example from a wide receiver perspective. Rashad Bateman, his rookie year, got injured, and it took a long time for him on the Ravens to be able to get up to speed and be able to move smoothly and be a part of that passing offense, right? It took him a very long time. And this is really starting to already impact a lot of different teams. I was taking a look. A lot of teams are kind of keeping it quiet, and that's why I wanted to discuss it today. Um, Not many are vocalizing what's happening with these second rounders, but I was able to find a couple of clips. One of them being Ben Johnson, the new head coach for the Browns, or sorry, the Bears, who was the offensive coordinator the um, for the Lions prior to this. I'll go ahead and show you this quick clip.
Yeah, no, he misses a lot. I mean, anytime you're not out there, if you're in the training room when the rest of the guys are practicing, you're losing valuable time with your coaches, valuable reps with your teammates, the ability to build the trust that we're talking about. It's not just the coaching staff having trust in you doing the right thing over and over, but it's also your teammates. They got to be out there. They got to see you do it. They got to know that the guy right left of them, that they're going to do the right things and they're going to make the plays when called upon. So, I think it's for everybody, and it's a shame that he got dinged up and missed all that time, because for a young player, it's really where you get the most reps and you can get better in a hurry that way.
So right away you can see, first time head coach, right? So obviously first year is important to him, and he probably is a lot more passionate about it than most might be from the start. But he obviously cares about the fact that his wide receiver isn't going to be available. There was a soft tissue injury that happened there, but also at the same time, he is not expected to report to camp, and so that's obviously going to be a huge impact. One aspect that I think is going to be interesting to see, and I think this might actually be the person that pushes the needle one way or the other on this perspective, is actually running back that was drafted for the Browns. Quinshon Judkins. If you didn't actually see this weekend's news, Quinshon Judkins was arrested for a domestic violence and assault charge. So this happened in Broward County. Quinshon is a second round pick, right? Not only that, but he's actually probably projected to take that number one seat, right? He's projected to be the starter for the Browns probably from the get-go. They let Nick Chubb leave. I know there's a lot of Browns fans out there that are not happy about that right now, especially because of the fact that they had a bell cow that was consistent. He didn't cause any problems off the field. He loved being a Brown, and he really didn't cause any problems for them. All he did was produce. He did have some injuries, and he was getting older, but at the same time, he was impactful for the team. He really helped them out. And so, being able to actually have a consistent running back is going to be crucial for the Browns, right? They have a crazy quarterback situation with Deshaun Watson being out for the year with an Achilles injury. They have Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, sorry, and then they drafted 2 rookie quarterbacks, and so their passing game is in question, and so their running game is super crucial. if I'm Quinshawn Judkins, I'm sure there's a lot of him that wants to be on the part of the rookies that are holding out for help or for more money and for more guaranteed money, I should say. But also at the same time, when you get in trouble like that and you haven't even touched the field as an NFL player, you probably want to make sure you get a contract. You probably want to make sure you're getting paid and your family's going to be taken care of, because, another situation like this that happens could very simply be something where the Browns are saying, hey, we were probably going to offer you this, but there's some concerns we have off the field. This is the best we can offer. And, when you're Quinshawn Judkins and you don't have much weight, in your name yet, right? You haven't proven yourself as an NFL running back. You're probably going to be more likely to just take what they're offering you. A couple of things that I think are going to be interesting to see from these second round picks. I'll dive in a little bit to, players that I think are going to be interesting to see when it comes to that second year. First things first, a couple of players that I want to pay attention to. Number one, JJ McCarthy, the quarterback for the Vikings. Now, why am I interested in him? What do I think is going to be curious to see with him is the fact that the Vikings had an amazing year last year. Regardless of being a wild card team, they were a playoff team, and really only reason why they didn't win their division was because the Lions were just that much better, and the Lions were one of the best teams in the NFL. The Vikings didn't necessarily have what you would consider to be a surefire quarterback room last year, right? They let Kirk Cousins walk. He was over in the Falcons, and they had drafted JJ McCarthy, but they had also picked up Sam Darnold. And everything leading into last year said JJ McCarthy was the guy. Preseason games, the preseason itself, you saw a lot of players and even teammates, other players talking about the fact that, JJ McCarthy is the guy. He's going to be an answer for them. And so because of that, there was a lot of confidence going into last season with JJ McCarthy as the quarterback. Unfortunately, he experienced a meniscus tear and had to get surgery before the season even started, which then opened the door for actual Sam Darnold. Now, Sam Darnold, kind of seen as a journeyman already in his career, was drafted in 2018, was a top 10 pick. Everyone was really excited and expected a lot of him coming out of college, and didn't have that much of a lackluster career to begin with. Sam Darnold was struggling with the Jets. You could say he had a lot of ups and downs. There was times on the field where, he would show these sparks and he would show these flashes of being an elite passer. And, he didn't necessarily have the best supporting cast. His offensive line was struggling as well. But he was still able to perform at times and still showed that he had a shot. Moving forward again, once he got the opportunity with the Vikings, no one really expected it, but he was able to provide some value, and he really was a great quarterback for them. I wouldn't even necessarily call it a team manager. He was much more so an actual contributor and helped them win games last year. So going into this year, they let Sam Darnold walk, right? They let Sam Darnold leave. Sam is now a part of the Seattle Seahawks, and they're trusting JJ McCarthy to be the guy. And so with that being said, going from a team that had a 14-3 record last year and made the playoffs, they're still expecting themselves to be a playoff team. They didn't make a lot of huge additions in the offseason. They already had a pretty complete team. They just now need a quarterback. And whether they're expecting JJ to just be a really good game manager this year and really just help them, keep status quo with what they had, or they're expecting him to have an even bigger impact than Sam Darnold. Those are the things I'm really curious to see from his perspective. Second player I'm really curious to learn a little bit more about and see how he does is Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr. might have been, in my opinion, one of the most highly touted wide receivers to come out of college last year. I think everyone was expecting him to have, a thousand plus yard season, 10 plus touchdowns. He was one of the first wide receivers taken in fantasy, regardless of rookies versus veterans. You saw a lot of people expecting a lot out of him. He didn't end up with, like, I would say, a bad season whatsoever. It was definitely a good season, especially from a rookie's perspective. He had 62 catches, 885 yards, and 8 touchdowns. I think if you were to look at any wide receiver minus, I would say your top 20 in the NFL, you'd probably be still pretty happy with those numbers. You wouldn't be super excited, but you're going to be happy with that. Sadly, I don't think that's what the Cardinals were hoping for. They've been pretty good at drafting wide receivers in the past. I mean, Anquan Bolden and Larry Fitzgerald are receivers that come to mind immediately when I think of the Cardinals. And Marvin Harrison Jr. obviously has the pedigree as well, that people, with that name Harrison, right, thinking about his father with the Colts. They're expecting a lot out of him. And, I think in order for the Cardinals to have any sort of success this year, they're going to be heavily reliant on Marvin Harrison Jr. to be able to actually provide that impact. The third player I'm going to talk about that I'm curious to see how they do is Troy Fatuanu. He's the right tackle for the Steelers. Why I think it's going to be interesting to see how he does. First off, he missed a lot of last year. I think he started one game last season, and then he ended up getting injured in practice. Obviously not what you want from your first round pick, but that's football, right? You're pretty much 100% guaranteed to get injured in a game, and he had some issues with an injury right from the beginning, which cut his season very short. The reason why I'm really curious to see how he performs and how he can step up this year is they are heavily reliant. The Steelers are heavily reliant right now on their pass game, in my opinion. Um, they didn't necessarily have the best run game last year. And on top of that, they let their starting running back leave, right? He's actually now a Charger. And with that being said, you have a very old quarterback, right? Aaron Rodgers is in his 40s, and he's not necessarily the most mobile quarterback anymore. I would say a couple years ago, you would say, hey, you were a top 5 quarterback. You were able to scramble and extend plays, but I would say post Achilles injury, Rodgers is much more your stereotypical stick in the pocket, pass the ball quarterback. He's not necessarily going to be able to extend plays with his legs. And so being able to have a right tackle that can protect him and be able to give him more time in the backfield is even more in the pocket is even more important. They have a pretty solid first receiver in DK Metcalf, and they did a good job of acquiring another tight end to go along with Pat Freiermuth, right? So they got Jonnu Smith in that trade that included Jalen Ramsey and sent Minkah Fitzpatrick to the Dolphins. So they have some passing weapons. A lot of people would argue they don't necessarily have a number 2 wide receiver. So with that being said, a lot of times you're going to depend on your line to be able to give your quarterback a little bit more time, not just your quarterback, but also your receivers a little bit more time to get open. That's going to be really important for them, and they're going to need to perform. And Troy's going to need to be able to perform in order to make this a successful run for the Steelers. They seem to be putting a lot into this year, putting a lot of their eggs into this basket for this year. I think a lot of people were kind of hoping they would stick with Mason Rudolph as their quarterback in order to, really punt this season, be able to find themselves in a position to actually draft a good quarterback in the draft next year. One of the blessings and the curses, and I'm sure a lot of Steelers fans know this, is the fact that they don't ever have losing seasons, but at the same time, they never find themselves in a position where they can quickly recoup value and get high value players in the draft, because they're generally drafting in the 20s or sometimes 30s in the first round, and so they're not able to get that marquee quarterback that can really turn their franchise around. They've kind of had to plug and play different quarterbacks in the past, really ever since trying to replace Ben Roethlisberger in order to find any sort of success, right? So last year that was Russell Wilson. They also had Justin Fields, Kenny Pickett. He was a draft pick for them. He was drafted 20th overall, or in the 20s, I should say, by them in the past, and that obviously didn't pan out. So for them, obviously having a strong offensive line is going to be crucial to the success of the Steelers this season. The fourth player that I think is going to be curious to see heading into the season from a second-year player perspective is Ricky Purcell, the wide receiver for the 49ers. And there's a couple of reasons why I'm curious to see how he performs. One, he had a very unique and I would say unexpected rookie season in the sense that he had an off of the field situation happen where he ended up getting shot. Not a lot of people would expect that. It wasn't something that he necessarily did wrong. Only time I've really ever seen an off the field incident like this was Brian Robinson, the running back for the Commanders, who had the same sort of issue. But the reason why I'm really curious about Ricky is because of the fact that the 49ers team, they didn't have a good season last season. I think a lot of people expected them, but I think a lot of it comes down to injuries that they had. But they did not perform to the level that many expected them to. And because of that, they found themselves outside of the playoff bubble last year. And not only that, they experienced so much success prior that they have a lot of players that were looking to get paid. And one of their, I would say, perennial guys that was unhappy about what his contract was like was Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel walked this year, right? They traded him to the 49ers, or sorry, to the Commanders. And so that's a marquee wide receiver that is not going to be an option for Brock Purdy going into this year. Brandon Ayuk, who got paid last year. He had an ACL injury. He missed most of the season last season. And so you have all of that. You have Christian McCaffrey, who had a really odd, but also at the same time understandable calf situation. He had a calf strain that a lot of athletes, not just NFL players, have experienced that have led to Achilles injuries. And so because of that, the 49ers and CMC even himself were pretty guarded and playing it pretty, they were being very cautious about him playing and getting that playing time. And so again, weapons and people around Brock Purdy and needing support, there were a lot of issues with that. And so Ricky Purcell, they're going to need him to perform this year. In order for the 49ers to have the season a lot of people are expecting, a lot of people, the pundits, they're expecting a bounce back season, not just because of the talent they have, but also because they have the easiest schedule in the NFL this year. And it's not even close. I think they're playing 3 or 4 playoff teams from last year total this season. So they have an easy road to the playoffs. They have a roadmap, but they still need the weapons and they need the production in order for them to be successful. And Ricky Purcell to me is a huge aspect of that. So I talked a little bit about this before, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about this now. The NFLPA situation, right? And it's kind of interesting. I know I touched a little bit about the second rounders first. I have a feeling that the second rounders contract situation and what I'm talking about now, I think those worlds are going to mesh at some point. I think people are going to be pretty shocked to see, what happens from that perspective. But I'm very, very confident that you will see what happened with the collusion case and the second rounders, these worlds colliding. And so what I mean by this is NFLPA director, or sorry, I should say executive director, Lloyd Howell is facing conflict of interest and scrutiny right now from NFL players, from the committee, and really from fans all around. So a little bit of backstory on this and why this happened. Deshaun Watson, right? He got that fully guaranteed contract several years ago. Clearly hasn't panned out for the Browns, and I'm sure a lot of NFL owners are using this as an example as to why, fully guaranteed contracts shouldn't exist. But At the time, there were 3 other quarterbacks that were in line for a new contract immediately after Deshaun Watson, that felt like there were some issues and some collusion that might have happened when their contract negotiations were going on. So I'm talking specifically about Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, and Russell Wilson. Um, all 3 of them, even at the time, were expected to get top dollar and reset the market, right? And so these are players that, were in line to get contracts, and they're saying, "Hey, Deshaun Watson got this fully guaranteed deal. Where's mine? I'm next," right? And so they wanted to set a new precedent in the NFL for these players to get fully guaranteed deals. And at the same time, it was very obvious that the NFL owners did not want to do that, right? And so there was actually a hearing and a collusion hearing about what was actually happening, where there was depositions with the 3 owners of these teams, right? So you're talking about the Broncos at the time with Russell Wilson, you're talking about the Cardinals with Kyler Murray, and then you're talking about the Ravens with Lamar Jackson. And if you really want to dive further into it, I really suggest you take a look at Mike Florio's report, as well as Pablo Torre did a great job on this. I even listed a Dominique Foxworth talk about this, who was a former NFLPA president for the players, and obviously is really passionate about that whole situation because of how much he cared about the NFLPA and the players themselves. But there were text messages that had taken place between these teams, between these owners, saying, "Hey, it would be really helpful if you didn't sign this person to a fully guaranteed deal, because we're next, and we don't want to do that with our quarterback," right? They found these text messages. This evidence was put into the hearing. They are part of the official transcripts. Um, the weird thing that happened was the fact that that same executive director, Lloyd Howell, he, amongst others, decided that it was probably best to keep this hearing and the contents of this hearing secret, right? He did not want what was talked about to get out into the public. And you're kind of wondering, like, why would you want to do that? What is the value as the NFLPA executive director to not let everyone know about these collusion issues and these potential, wrongdoings of these players? Um, and so I think there's a lot of people that did some digging from this perspective. And I think the interesting thing that happened, and what was really discovered, was the fact that Lloyd Howell was actually a part of also a consulting firm, a private equity firm that was approved to be able to become minority owners of an NFL team. As you can imagine, that is 100%, in my opinion, a conflict of interest. You are there to support these players and make sure that they are provided the union rights and capabilities that they're asking for, and they're also paying you top dollar to do it. You got paid $3.4 million to be the NFLPA executive director. So why be a part of a consulting firm that is acquiring these that has the ability to acquire these teams, right? Because not only are you saying, "Hey, I'm here to help you against the ownership," but also you're trying to become a potential owner of an NFL team. And so there's a lot of I would say, issues that a lot of players have with that, right? And it's interesting because the pushback, that the players have had, really haven't resulted in anything for them. Lloyd Howe has been pretty dismissive of the entire situation. His private equity firm has even come out and said that Lloyd Howe has not been a single part of any of these acquisitions. He has no knowledge of these acquisitions, and so therefore he has no reason to be. There is no conflict of interest in the situation. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself, why is he a part of this then, right? Is your salary from the NFLPA not enough where you need to be a part of this? What is your actual involvement with this private equity firm and its relationship with the NFL? So I think that's really important, I think it's going to turn into a thing where there is going to be more digging into this, because the issue with Lloyd Howe was raised about 10 months ago. And what they found when they realized he was a part of the Carlyle Group, this private equity firm, they're like, "Hey, why are you a part of this? But not only that, how come you haven't appealed the collusion case that we had, right? So that collusion hearing I'm talking about, the results of that, right? The hearing, final order was the fact that there was no collusion, not enough at least to cause or charge the NFL owners or punish them in any sort of way. And so everyone's sitting there saying, "Hey, it's been 6 months since that hearing. Why haven't we appealed this?" And then people started to dig into it, and they started to see his connections to this private equity firm, and that caused a lot of people to be pretty mad in the NFL. Um, and the interesting part to me, at least, and the reason why I do think that there is something definitely suspicious here, is the fact that it wasn't until there was this pushback about him being a part of this consulting firm that they actually decided to appeal the decision on the hearing, right? So they had that collusion hearing about 6 months ago. He was just going to let it go until there was pushback about his involvement with this private equity firm. And I think that's something that is pretty scary. I think there's a lot of NFL players out there that could, lose any trust that they had in the NFLPA. I know that there was already an issue with that. The NFLPA already didn't have the best reputation amongst the players. They didn't see them as someone that was really helping them. So there's a huge challenge with that. So the reason why I'm saying this is going to be kind of tied together is because in the end, these second round picks, them holding out, right? Them waiting to get guaranteed money, there's going to be a lawsuit about this, whether it's the teams challenging the NFLPA or the players suing both the NFLPA and the owners for lost wages because of this holdout, right? The NFLPA is telling these second rounders, "Hey, hold tight. We're going to try to get you these guaranteed deals." Right? They're holding the line just like the owners are. That's why these second round players aren't showing up. They're being told to, right? They're saying, "Hey, it's in your best interest not to show up to camp," right? We're working on these guaranteed deals. So you have players like Judkins, who I mentioned before for the Browns, who just got arrested. He's probably wondering about his future in the NFL, and at the same time, he has the NFLPA telling him not to sign it. But from my opinion, if you're Quinshawn Judkins, would you listen to the NFLPA, the same people that are also not helping you with helping the other players with these guaranteed deals, getting fully guaranteed deals? I think I would have a problem with that. I would probably be trying to sign a deal as soon as possible if I'm Quinshawn Judkins. There's other players with the same situation, right? When you're a second round pick, you're making good money, but you have to sign a deal in order to make that money. It's not something where you get drafted and suddenly there's millions of dollars in your bank account, right? You might get some sponsorship deals and things along those lines, but you're still having to prove yourself as a second rounder. Like, even that spot is not guaranteed. You're not going to get cut most likely your first year, most likely not your second year, but you can be on the hot seat, and you could also not be getting playing time very easily. There's many second rounders that haven't panned out. On the other hand, there's also a lot of second rounders that have. And so I think from the team's perspective, they're probably not happy about this. I was taking a look. I mean, you had players like Brett Favre, Drew Brees, Tom Lambert as second round picks in the past, right? These are historical, Hall of Fame players that have been picked in the second round and can have impacts on teams. So these teams probably want to get this done. The owners are saying, "Hey, hold tight. We're not going to provide the guaranteed deal." And then on the other side, the players are saying the same exact things. They're saying, "Hey, hold off, hold the line. We're waiting for those guaranteed deals." So it's going to be really curious to see what happens. And I think, honestly, we're getting to the point where training camp is about to start. And so because of that, I think there's going to be a lot of people that are hopefully going to be signing a deal soon, because I don't think there's anyone, NFL players, NFL fans especially, that want these second round picks to be missing any more playing time or any more training camp time, because that impacts not just that player, it impacts that team as well. A lot of times they are expecting a second round pick to have an impact on that team. And so it's really going to hurt both sides from that perspective. All right, so next segment I'm really going to discuss and kind of go over today are rookies I have my eye on. So I think there's going to be a couple obvious ones, but I think also there's some other ones that I think some probably aren't really necessarily thinking about. And I'll start with the most obvious one. I think this is going to be the one most people are probably curious about. It's Travis Hunter, right? Travis Hunter, wide receiver, cornerback, drafted out of Colorado, second overall to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And like, why am I most curious and what's going to be most interesting to see? It's the obvious. It's the fact of like, where is he getting most of his snaps, and where is he practicing the most in training camp, and where is he the most in preseason games? Again, rookies, right? This is their first time with the team. This is their first time with a playbook. There's a lot of new things, and so because of that, they try to focus as much as possible on what's going to be most important and crucial to them in game, going into week one. That is what they're going to spend the most time with when it comes to Travis Hunter going into the season, right? Where are we going to spend the most time with you? Where do we see you most valuable right away? And so because of that, you're going to see in these practices, in the preseason games, where he's lined up. Is it truly fully split? Is he playing cornerback? Is he playing wide receiver to the fullest extent, right? Is he starting at both positions? I think that's going to probably be, in my opinion, now that I've really dove into this more, I think that's going to be the least common one. Is he primarily a wide receiver and then they have some packages with him as a cornerback? Is he mostly a cornerback and then he has some special plays as a wide receiver? Or did they just pick him to say, hey, you're a cornerback for us, or hey, you're a wide receiver for us? I tend to think that it's going to be somewhere in the middle, based off of where the team is and how the game is played. My opinion is they're going to have him be mostly his core position will be cornerback. He's even listed as a cornerback on the roster, and I think that might be the most telling thing so far. That's what I can go off the most. I've seen some mini camp practices. I've seen them probably the most at cornerback in those highlights. I'm not sure if that's because he's not creating many highlights from a wide receiver perspective. That could be one aspect of it, but to me, I see him becoming more of a cornerback with some wide receiver packages. The way the NFL works, it is a passing league, and obviously on both sides, he would be impacting that passing perspective. But you're going to be going up against some top wide receivers. AFC South is not short of good wide receivers as the rest of the NFL is. And I think for them, they can see and trust him to be a lockdown number one cornerback immediately. They can find themselves some pass catchers easier than I think you can find a lockdown corner in the NFL. I think if you were to ask someone, what would be most valuable to a team, a lockdown corner or a number one wide receiver, most people would say lockdown corner. It's easy to find some people on the street or in free agency or these undrafted rookie free agents that can have an impact at wide receiver. There's plenty of talent in that world, but to me, cornerback, it's a whole different art. It's a whole different world. You have so much pressure on you. In the NFL, it's even harder to be successful as a cornerback because of the rules, right? The refs don't make your life easy. Like you can get a flag for essentially touching wide receivers past 5 yards for pretty much anything in the NFL nowadays. So I think it would be most beneficial for the Jacksonville Jaguars to focus him on the defensive side. Second player I'm most curious to see that is the second rookie I'm most curious to see is Shamar Stewart, the edge rusher for the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, there's a lot of reasons why I'm most curious to see what happens with him in training camp. And, first one being the fact that he's actually holding out as a first round pick, right? So For those that don't know this, Shamar Stewart, who was drafted out of Texas A&M as an edge rusher, which is a huge need, first off, for the Cincinnati Bengals, is holding out because Cincinnati Bengals decided to put language in his contract that they hadn't used prior, and they're trying to implement this. And Shamar Stewart is essentially the guinea pig in implementing this new uh, implementing this new contract term, essentially what says if you get injured, any part of your guaranteed dollars after this can be voided, right? So as soon as you get injured, let's say he gets injured his rookie year and he had $25 million guaranteed, he only got 5 million of that 25 million guaranteed so far. That 20 million that hasn't gotten paid yet can be voided if he gets injured. We talked about this before. 100% guarantee you're going to get injured in the NFL. It is a 100% guarantee. It might not happen every single year. He might be lucky or be one of the fortunate ones that aren't experiencing those injury issues. But at the same time, it's scary to say, hey, like, because of something that might be out of my control, right? You don't always have control over someone rolling up on your ankle or landing on your leg or your arm the wrong way, whatever it might be, right? Like, you're in the trenches as an edge rusher. People are stepping all over you, they're falling all over you. It's really easy to get twisted up and turned up in those situations. So for them to say, hey, like, if you get injured, we can void the rest of your money, that's not a term that they want to agree with. And it's totally understandable. If I'm on Shamar's side from this perspective, I think it's kind of crazy that they're trying to implement this, and I can totally understand why he's holding out. The other side of this is the fact that the Cincinnati Bengals have a lot of, again, trouble at the edge side, right? Last year, their defense was a problem to begin with. I think everyone that saw last season would tell you that Joe Burrow played an NFL MVP caliber season, and their offense was unbelievable, but their defense was equally as bad in that season, to the point where they didn't make the playoffs. They had a good push at the end, but they weren't able to actually get into the playoffs after having, again, an MVP caliber quarterback passing to probably the best wide receiver duo in the NFL. And along with those defensive challenges, you had a couple of things arise, right? It's not just Shamar Stewart that's holding out right now. It's Trey Hendrickson. Trey Hendrickson led the NFL in sacks last year. He proved himself to be a bona fide edge rusher that deserves top dollar in the NFL. And Cincinnati hasn't paid him what he's looking for. He still has 1 year left on his deal, and I think Cincinnati's hoping he honors that contract. But Trey Hendrickson also had to watch multiple people get paid, not just on the Bengals, but other edge rushers outside of his team get paid. Myles Garrett reset the market. He's getting $40 million a year as an edge rusher, right? He's watching Max Crosby get paid, right? Another edge rusher, less sacks than he did. Same thing with Myles Garrett. Trey Hendrickson outperformed these players last year from a sack perspective, and they got paid, and he's still waiting for his contract, and he didn't show up to mandatory minicamp. He's been very vocal about it. He's not a loud guy to begin with, but he's talked to the media and he's expressed his displeasure with this. So Trey Hendrickson is holding out, right? So that's two edge guys right off the bat that you're talking about are not going to be a part of the team, or not a part of training camp to start, most likely, for the Cincinnati Bengals. Let's add another name, right? Yeah, it gets worse. Sam Hubbard, right? Sam Hubbard. Not a lot of people are talking about this. Sam Hubbard retired last year. He was the edge opposite side of Trey Hendrickson, right? I'm not saying that he's the reason Trey Hendrickson had the year he had last year, but Sam Hubbard is a great player. He provided a lot of value to that team, and he's for sure not showing up. He retired. And so that's three players at edge that the Bengals could have thought might have been available to them in this upcoming season. They're not going to be there right now. The Bengals paid Joe Burrow last year. They paid Jamar Chase and T. Higgins this offseason. They both got really good deals. Jamar Chase got a great deal. And Trey Hendrickson had to watch all of that. He had to watch these players get paid, and he was sitting there saying, "Hey, where's my deal?" And I think the Bengals are probably saying, "Hey, we had to pay these guys. Your time is next year." And I think he had to be told that last year, and I think he's holding firm. It sounds to me, he's requested a trade. I think Trey Hendrickson is a guy that if he was going to show up, he would have already been there. I really do believe that if he was going to show up, he would have already been there. And so for me, that's why Shamar Stewart's contract is so important. I know we've spent a lot of time talking about other people, but all of this started because of Shamar Stewart, who's holding out as the first round pick for the Bengals. The third player, NFL rookies, that I'm most curious to see is Jackson Dart, right? Quarterback taken by the Giants, right? So probably wondering, like, why not Cam Ward? Well, truth be told, I think Cam Ward is going to have a decent season, and I don't expect a lot from the Titans, and so like I'm not really going to take into account what his season looks like. But I'm curious about Jackson Dart because he was the second quarterback taken off the board, but he was taken at 25, and so that says a lot about the quarterback draft room going into this season, right? So Cam Ward, number one quarterback taken off, he was taken at 1. The next quarterback wasn't taken until 25, right? That's a big drop. We haven't really seen quarterbacks taken that late that have been super impactful in the first round. Generally, people are that says that people see there's something they don't like, right? There's a lot of teams ahead of the Giants, including the Giants themselves in an earlier pick where they took Abdul Carter, um, that could have taken Jackson Dart sooner, but they didn't take him, right? And so I think that says a lot about about what people think about Jackson Dart. But at the same time, even though they waited until 25, they still drafted him in the first round. So to me, you're expecting that player to be a starter to begin with, right? You're expecting Jackson Dart to have an immediate impact. He had a great career. I think people think pretty highly of him from a personality perspective, coming out of Ole Miss. But you're playing with the Giants in a really tough division. You're going to see the Commanders twice. You're going to see the Eagles twice, right? That's 4 tough games immediately without even looking at the rest of their schedule that you could potentially chalk up as a loss, very simply. And so Jackson Dart going into training camp, what are they expecting from him? I think is going to be really interesting to see. Um, so those are the 3 main players that I'm most curious to see going into training camp from a rookie perspective. The last things I'm really going to touch on today for this show are really just a couple things. One is going back to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Not a lot of people, I feel like, are talking about this enough. I think, in my opinion, at least, I feel like the Steelers get a pass a lot of the times from this perspective, and so I'm curious to see what happens. But does TJ Watt actually show up to training camp for the Steelers this year? Um, Again, another edge rusher who saw Max Crosby, he saw Myles Garrett get huge contracts, right? Michael Parsons is also, next in line, and the media are talking about it as if that deal will be done. I haven't heard much about how close they are, but everyone seems to be pretty confident about that. And media also seems to be pretty confident about TJ Watt. But at the same time, the Steelers picked up Aaron Rodgers, not to like a huge deal, right? But they did bring in DK Metcalf, immediately signed to him to a large extension. And then they did the same thing with Jalen Ramsey. They brought him in and signed him to an extension, and he's getting paid. He's getting good money. And TJ Watt is watching this and he's saying, "Hey, seem to be shelling out money to other people." He's one of those guys, like, even though he's 31 years old, he wants to be making top dollar. He wants to be making $40 million this year. There's no doubt in my mind that's what he's expecting based off of Myles Garrett getting paid. Now, mind you, Myles Garrett got paid that much, in my opinion, because the Browns were pretty much being the Browns and did the same thing they did with Deshaun Watson. They're like, "Hey, like, Myles Garrett, you're requesting a trade. All right, fine. We don't want you to leave. We're just going to give you an offer you can't refuse. We're just going to throw so much money at you that you're going to stay." And he got $40 million a year as an edge rusher, which I think, if you were telling me this going into next year, I'd still say that was a high amount for an edge rusher. Like he got top dollar for that. And so as when you're TJ Watt and you're saying, hey, I'm a multi all pro, multi leading the league in sacks player. I'm a huge reason we don't lose games. We don't have a losing season every single year. Where's my money? Right? You're paying these new guys that haven't done anything in a Steelers jersey. How come I'm not getting paid? So I think that's going to be really curious to see. I think the media generally gives the Steelers a little bit of a pass when it comes to that. Like I think Trey Hendrickson's story is definitely become um, a bigger story in the NFL or the NFL media are focusing on. But I think TJ Watt's situation is just as important and just as um, crucial to the team's success. Last thing I'm going to really touch on is, and one thing I'm really curious to see going into training camp is like, who are these Oakland Raiders going to be this year? They've made a lot of changes, whether that be coach, quarterback, other positional players, but they're also in a really tough division. I think that the AFC West is going to be the top. I think has a really good chance to be the top division in the AFC at least. You obviously have the Kansas City Chiefs, perennial playoff team, perennial Super Bowl team. They seem to be getting there every single year. They have for like essentially the last 4 years, basically, missing 1 year. But you also have the Denver Broncos who found a guy in Bo Nix. Bo Nix has really turned around that Broncos organization. With Sean Payton. I think they are a lot better than people realize. Their defense is scary. They have a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, and they're well put together. And they have a quarterback that is, I think, a competitor. I think he's passionate, and I think he works hard. And I think because of that, the Broncos are going to be a really good team. And so, you have them, and then you also have the Chargers. Like, so let's not forget about the Chargers. The Chargers have a great team. Anytime you have Justin Herbert as your quarterback, and then you have the defense that they have, you have Jim Harbaugh at coach, who seemingly finds success everywhere he goes. Their run game is the focal point. But they're always, he always seems to find success, and you have great receivers like Lad McConkey for them, who I expect to have a breakout season. Even though he had a great rookie season, I expect him to have a breakout year, right? So those are 3 teams right there that I think are playoff caliber teams. So you have to ask yourself, like, who are the Oakland Raiders, right? Like they brought in Geno Smith. I'd say someone that probably has a chip on his shoulder again. I don't think he really expected to be not on the Seahawks this year after what he was able to do with them the last couple years. He really had like a I would say like a second chance, and like he revamped his career with the Seahawks. He saw a lot of success with them. He at certain times he was even considered and talked about as a MVP caliber quarterback. I don't think anyone saw that when he was in his first or second year with the Jets, right? He was everyone was kind of saying, "Oh, this guy's probably a bust. He's probably not going to work out." And here we are, and he's the starting quarterback for the Oakland Raiders, or sorry, the Oakland Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders. Wow, Kyle, the Las Vegas Raiders going into this season. And so I'm really curious to see what they end up being this year, because I still think even though they are in such a tough division, I still see them being pretty solid. I think they made a lot of good decisions this offseason, Geno Smith being one of those. And so like they're a team that I'm looking at like as a potential dark horse that could surprise some people. So we'll see what happens there. Obviously, training camp is just getting started around the NFL. The Chargers are already there. Some other teams are going to be reporting this week as well to the NFL training camp. I'm really excited to cover those amongst other things. Feel free to like, subscribe, comment. Would love to see what people think about my first ever episode. Feel free to ask any questions. I'd be happy to talk about those in later videos. And I hope everyone else has a good rest of their Monday, and have fun watching these training camps start. I'll talk to you later.